In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Linux console. So, the Linux console is kind of an interesting concept. The Linux console is a system console, so we went over that. The Linux console is basically the idea of a system console implemented into Linux. Now, the Linux console is basically a command line interface to speak to the kernel. However, what's unique about the Linux console is it was the very first way to speak to the Linux console ever. It was built in the very first instance, in the very first creation of the very first Linux kernel made by Linus Torvalds himself. This was the first and, for a time, the only way to speak to the Linux kernel and to tell it what to do. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is the Linux console has been more or less, it's a redundancy these days. It does not need to exist these days. It's been more or less replaced by the shell, which apparently, to my understanding, works alongside the Linux console, but the shell does not actually talk to the Linux console. The shell talks to the Linux kernel. So that's my understanding. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will let me know down in the comments. Now, one of the other reasons that I'm bringing up the Linux console, and here's the purpose. The Linux console provides a way, yada yada yada, receive text-based input and output. In Linux, many devices can be used as a system console, so on and so forth, yada yada yada. Now, to my understanding, and I could be wrong, put it down in the comments if I am, the Linux console is the tree that creates the virtual consoles, or rather, it after the init boot process is complete, the console will be used to multiplex multiple virtual terminals. Virtual terminals I'll go over in another time. So virtual terminals are basically the implementation of the idea of a virtual console. So virtual console, yada yada, blah blah blah, yada yada. Yeah. So basically, the Linux console allows possible the idea of a virtual console, and it creates, and the virtual console actually implemented is the virtual terminal, right? So yeah, it's a very weird and concept. I could be wrong. I've spoken to a bunch of people. They don't really know what it is either. So, but that's basically what I understand the Linux console to be. It's a redundancy that does not need to exist anymore, and that it's been more or less replaced by other shells, and that the closest thing to the Linux console that we can access is the virtual terminal, which I'll go over at another time. And that's my little video for today. If you guys like these videos, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and help the channel out. Appreciate it.